This discussion is one that's very global. It's based in the US, that's where I'm from, and a lot of our examples occur from the United States. But we have a great deal of research involving the rest of the planet. We have a lot of participants who come from around the world. We've had discussions from South America, from the Middle East, from Europe, from East Asia and Central Asia, and from across North America. So we want to expand this and keep going with this. Not to mention Australia. I don't want to leave you guys out. And I've also presented and led this session from Europe, from 3 different locations there. Now, we can only do all this work with the generous help of a series of sponsors. So I want to name them right now. The first is NYSERNet from New York State, a nonprofit that provides connectivity to a lot of higher education institutions there. We're very grateful to NYSERNet. We're also grateful to Shindig, because Shindig provides 2 very powerful sources of support. One is this technology that we're using right now, and also the people who help make it work and who help connect everything and make all the bells ring and all the whistles chime. So we're grateful to Shindig. And we're also grateful to a growing horde of people who support this work on Patreon. So these are people who contribute to a monthly cause. As low as $1 a month they contribute to keeping this research initiative alive. We can't do it without you guys, and we really appreciate it. If you haven't seen this, or if you're curious, go to patreon.com/Brian Alexander, and you can learn more. Now, let's cut to the chase, to where we are today. Today's topic is an annual report published by the New Media Consortium called the Horizon Report. And our presenter for this, our guest, is Paul Signorelli, who is waiting in the wings right now. He is based in the Bay Area. He's a writer, trainer, instructor, designer, presenter, social media strategist, consultant, an all-around expert and great person. We're really grateful to have Paul here. So before we talk about the Horizon Report, why don't we bring Paul up on stage so he can introduce it.
That is probably the most easy effort I've ever made to get onto a stage without rising out of a chair, Brian. Thank you.
Well, we're glad to provide a stage for you. Are you in San Francisco right now?
I am, yes, enjoying the weather, enjoying the chance to be with all of you. San Francisco suddenly seems like a much bigger city as I look around at who's here on Shindig.
Well, this is definitely a large, sprawling crowd. We're really grateful for you to come, Paul. I gave a 1-sentence introduction to you. Before we go further, can you just take a couple more sentences and tell us what you're up to?
I thought you said everything, Brian. I'm not sure there's anything else
Well,
to say.
then we can move on if you want.
Yeah, let's just jump into it.
Okay. So how long have you been working on the Horizon Report? How many years?
I believe it's been 6 years now. I was aware of it a couple years before I became involved, and then, long story made short, I got asked onto one of the advisory panels, and I've been active with New Media Consortium ever since.
Excellent. And like the mafia, you just can't let go.
Yeah, they keep drawing me back in.
Pulling you back in. That's right. Well, let's talk about the Horizon Report, and let's introduce it, because not everybody here knows it, and it would be good to get everyone on the same page. So would you like to do the honors, or shall I?
I'll start the honors, and then you correct me as we go. I'm sure that between the two of us, we can do a creditable view. From my point of view, the Horizon Report is an amazing document. As I was reading over the latest one this week, I realized that it's a strong example of the very thing that we're talking about today, how technology shows up in all sorts of places in very creative ways. And the technology behind both a printed document and one that's available online free of charge to anybody who wants to look at it is really a clever and very useful tool. The report is put together each year with a panel of anywhere from about 50 to 75 advisory panelists from all over the world. As you know, Brian, and as others may know, there are different editions of it. We're talking today about higher education, but there's also a K through 12, there's a library, there's a museum one, and there are regional reports also. So to be very concise about it, for me, the Horizon Report is where it's my go-to place to see what's happening in educational technology in 1, 2 to 3, and 4 to 5 year horizons, or windows of time. See the trends, the challenges, and the technologies that are developing.
Well, that's really well said.
I'm surprised.
Just add a couple more things. The timeline for Horizon is about 5 years, where it looks for developments that will occur 5 years from now. It usually breaks those down to 1 year, 2 to 3 year, 4 to 5 years. And what's fascinating for me and for other people as well is the process by which this is done. The New Media Consortium publishes it in collaboration with EDUCAUSE's ELI. The New Media Consortium devotes writing talent, design talent to making it happen. But it's also the product of an interesting group of people. There are about 78 of us this year that go through what's called a Delphi process. This is where you get a group of experts from around the world, and you locate them in a specific time or place, and you ask them questions about the future of their domain. In this case, these are questions about where education and technology, higher education, are going. And you shape these questions in certain ways so that you can help form everybody's thinking and help them distill their understanding of what's going to happen next. So they can ask this group, what technologies are going to be the most salient? What are the biggest challenges? And then we get to argue about it. We're going to talk about which technology, which challenge, which trend empowering technology. And this goes on for what, 2 months, Paul?
Yes.
And it happens entirely, in this case, online. We do this mostly through a wiki. So we have people who populate the wiki with resources, with articles, with videos, with podcasts describing possible outcomes. And then we have detailed arguments that go on for page after page, or where you're trying to figure out, is equity the biggest issue? How about wireless power? How about artificial intelligence or robots? It's a great discussion, and I really enjoy being part of it. And when we're done, when we've generated thousands and thousands of words, the New Media Consortium staff turns that into prose, into a very attractive report. So Paul and I have been working together, although not face-to-face, for years now, it seems.
Yeah, the nice thing here, it sort of gets us into one of the themes I hope we'll explore out of the report today, is the whole blended experience. As Brian just said, we oftentimes are working online in a worldwide environment that is facilitated by a wonderfully done wiki, but we also do get together if we're lucky enough to be at conferences throughout the year. So what starts online carries into those rooms when we're all together, and then carries back online in a variety of ways. I think that's something that's at the heart of how we're training, teaching, learning these days. So I enjoy the process as Brian does. I actually think of it as getting a mini master's every year in educational technology because it is so intense and so eye-opening.
Nice. That's a good way of putting it. A mini master's. It really is that detailed. Well, why don't we dive into the contents of the report? There are, like Gall, the report is divided into three, and there are three sections. People often really focus on the technology part, but why don't we save the technology part for last? Do you want to talk about the challenges or the trends first?
Why don't we start with the trends? I've got the report in front of me, and I think that's the order it goes in.
You've got your print copy?
Actually, I've got my
said
print
enviously.
copy. Well, I printed one out from the net so I could make copious notes, of course, which never happened. And I was lucky enough when I got back from an out-of-town trip yesterday to find the printed copies that we get from NMC. So,
Good.
yeah, I've got it all in front of me. And Brian, if you want, I'll just hand it to you right now. Let's see if I can get
Thank
it up.
you.
There you
Thank
go.
you. I appreciate that. Very good. Technology is
Hey,
amazing.
virtual sharing here.
Yes, very well. So these are trends that that power or drive technological adoption, right?
Yes.
Well, why don't you work through them? There's 6 of them, I think.
Yes. You want me to start on them, or did you have
Go
a
ahead.
question that you wanted
Oh,
to?
go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so briefly, what we're looking at in the short-term trends, and to me, it's a cohesive theme that runs through the entire report. The themes of blended learning design and collaborative learning. It talks about something that, well, let's put this in perspective. I think you started to do this, Brian. I want to make sure people who haven't seen the report understand what we're doing here. The short-term trend is short-term trends, the two we focused on, are the ones that we believe are reaching maturity or widespread dissemination, which I think NMC says is around 20 to 25% dissemination in the domains here, higher education they're referring to.
Yes.
So what we all came up with, and Samantha Becker, by the way, should get a good call out here for writing this. The writing in this is exquisite. But Samantha and the others at NMC talked about blended learning designs and collaborative learning being the things that are going to be getting most of our attention over the next year in significant ways. And I'm totally in agreement with that, not surprisingly. When I look at the blended learning design issues and I think about what I've been doing over the last 4 or 5 years, what I've seen you do, Brian, at some of the NMC conferences, we are really living a blended experience. And people that think, oh, online learning or being able to jump back and forth and being online face to face is something of the future. I don't think they're really paying attention to what's happening, not only in higher education, but in the entire learning landscape that's out there. Collaborative learning, for me, dates back at least 10 years when I was getting a master's degree. And it was one of the first online programs I had ever been involved in. I was working with colleagues in the United States, in Canada, and a couple of other places. We were doing reports together. Like one course required that our semester-long marketing class produce a marketing plan for one of the organizations that we were serving. So for me, collaborative learning online and face-to-face goes a long way, and I'm glad to see that it seems to be disseminated at this level that NMC has called attention to it. When we look at the midterm trends that are cited in the report,
it's a pause you just for 1 second.
Yes.
Just one mistake I made. Let me just remind everybody, and speaking of collaborative and blended learning, that this is a discussion, and it's one that we really, really want you to contribute to. And I know you will have questions and comments as we go. So let me just remind everybody, there are 4 different channels that you can use to contribute content back to us. So if you look at the bottom left or bottom right corner of the screen, that little teal box, there are 3 different options you can use. There's a question mark. And if you click that, that lets you ask a question. So you can type in the question. I'll read it out loud, and it'll flash on the screen. If your mic works, if your video camera works, and you feel comfortable talking, click the raise hand icon. That'll tell us you want to come up on stage, and you can join Paul and I, and you can ask us a question and make an observation. You can also ask a question in your chat box, and your colleagues can respond. And on top of that, if you're on Twitter, you can just tweet anything using the hashtag FTTE, and we'll see it and work it in. So please, this is going to cover a lot of ground, and there's a lot to say here. So we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Sorry to interrupt, Paul. I just want to make sure.
I'm glad you did. And let me add a 5th option. If you have a drone, Brian and I are open to receiving questions by drones.
Yes.
And I'm with Brian on this. The 2 of us talking is a beginning point, but when you all get involved in this, we really feel the strength of what we're looking at in the way educational technology is using and the way we interact with each other. So if you've got questions, shoot them to us, and we will certainly break out of mold. If you type them into the chat box and I don't see them, Brian will call it to attention so we can turn this into a good, highly interactive session that shows you exactly what we're talking about. So briefly looking at midterm trends, they were the growing focus on measuring learning. This is that fancy jargon stuff about learning analytics. We're seeing more and more people, and I'm part of that group, using analytics to see where our learners are and react in real time to bring them along. I'll save the examples for later, but bring me back to that if people want examples of how analytics are working at a very simple level. The redesigning learning spaces is something that I just love. And Tom Hames out of Houston, who's very active in New Media Consortium, does great work. If that part of the report appeals to you, look for Tom Hames, Haymes, online. Is it Houston Community College West, Brian? Is that the right organization?
I think so. It's definitely Houston Community College.
And his website, I think it's called Idea Spaces, which is just a knockout example of asynchronous learning. I think he still uses the WordPress platform to do these incredible things through Idea Spaces, dealing with learning spaces and other things. So those are the 2 things we're seeing midterm, 2 to 3 years, as being major trends that are going to affect what we're all doing out there. And finally, the long-term trends, advancing cultures of innovation and deeper learning approaches. Again, deeper learning to me just seems like such a no-brainer. I'm surprised that we're looking at it being that far up, but I understand that a lot of people haven't explored that yet. That's a simple thing of using project-based or challenge-based learning, getting the learners to do their hands-on stuff rather than just listening to lectures like the one I'm trying not to give you right now. And advancing cultures of innovation is that whole theme of let's find the entrepreneur within each of us and see how our learning environments, not just higher ed, but any learning environment, can draw learners in, make them active participants in what we're doing, and see how that benefits us as an entire culture, an entire civilization, rather than taking a course and at the end of it saying, okay, I got my A, I can forget that and move on. To me, this is really exciting, cohesive stuff, and I'm glad to be part of it.
Well, these positive trends, these are drivers that are in many ways accelerating our use and adoption of technology. I mean, you could think about how we're going to be using big data in learning analytics, the software, the hardware, the infrastructure necessary to support that. You can think about blended learning, about all the different ways that we're combining audio, video, images to do that. Learning spaces, how we're taking all this and distributing it into the physical environment. We have more to cover, but let me just say, if you guys have questions that you want to ask, we're standing by and ready for them.
And somebody was nice enough to just put ideaspaces.net into the chat. So, yeah, that's great to have that up.
That's Mark. Mark Wilson is a fiend when it comes to URLs. He grabs them just like lightning.
I don't see that in his name identification. It doesn't say Mark Wilson Fiend, but I guess I'm not seeing that.
It should. It should. Your metadata is just. Well, we've got those drivers pushing technology forward. I'm curious, which of these seems to you most powerful in your work, in the clients that you work with, and the people that you teach and consult with? Which of these seems most salient right now?
While all of them do, the blended learning is where I'm putting most of my efforts. And that comes not only because I think that's where our future and our present in learning is, but because at a visceral level, it really appeals to me. I got hooked into blended learning at a visceral level 4 years ago, I guess, when ETMOOC, the Educational Technology and Media MOOC, was started out of Regina, Canada. You can still go online and find the site for that. It was done by Alec Kouros out of Regina, Canada, and a bunch of other people. What we did there was start to interact within a framework that Alex set up online. We used, I believe, Blackboard as our way of communicating. And Blackboard was so visceral that in some ways it always felt like we were right in the same room with Alex, whether we were watching it live or whether we were watching video. Time after time, as I was watching, time after time, when we were doing this, I would feel like I needed to be responding, and I would start to reach for the keyboard and have to slap my own hand and say, "Oh no, it isn't live," even though it felt live. And that whole blending of asynchronous versus synchronous kind of learning opened my eyes up to possibilities beyond what I think we're traditionally thinking of in blended. For me, blended is asynchronous as well as synchronous. It's face-to-face as well as live. It is using Twitter and Facebook and others to bring people into the classroom. And in essence, turn every session like the one we're doing today into one big global classroom where the only thing we can't really do is reach out and clink a bottle of wine with each other. Although Sam and I did that visually once when I was bringing her into a room via Google Hangout. And we just choreographed it so that at the end, I held up my bottle of wine and she had hers on the screen right in the same place. And people were looking and saying, well, you can really give the feeling that somebody is there blended in a live environment. So this to me is exciting and it's productive and it's very creative.
It is very creative, and it's just getting better and better as the technology improves incrementally. We had a question from Mark the Fiend, which was about an issue that came up earlier discussion today. And let me just put this question out here and then see, we may want to come back to this later after we look at other challenges and technologies. But he asks if digital technology can be used to build trust. What theories, pedagogy, and methods help build and maintain trust between communities?
Okay, I'm seeing that question. Let's see if we can use this as a moment of engagement. Those of you who are watching this, start with the first thing that Mark and Brian just asked. Do you think digital technology can be used to build trust? If you want to just type it into chat, yes, no, or I don't know yet, that would be a good starting point for us, or just comment live if you want to do that. Let's do something that, oh, good, we're getting some yeses. I'm going to do something that is not traditionally done where you have to fill every second. I'm going to give this about 30 seconds so you can think about this and get
Okay,
something out.
good. So again, this is the question of, can digital technology be used to build trust?
So we've seen
And
some
we
yeses. Vicky, for those of you that may not be seeing the chat, Vicky's saying it provides access and a platform for many. Cha Ling, if I'm not saying her name or his name wrong, says it depends. Fair enough. Seems like the people who are responding with a yes to that. So Brian, let's go back to the second part of it. What theories, pedagogy, and methods help build and maintain trust? What are you all seeing in terms of methods that have helped you build trust?
Well, you mentioned one of them just now, which was decent video conferencing. Over time, being able to see somebody, and I think very importantly to hear their voice. So you can hear their intonations, their timbre, their laughter, their hems and haws. I think it makes people more visible to each other, literally, and more present to each other.
I like Andy's comment here about sometimes so much trust, you can build so much trust that you can absorb a ton of fake news.
Yes, that's quite
Not that
true.
any of us are concerned about fake news or digital literacy, which is one of the things we're going to be getting to in a few minutes, right?
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Che Ling, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, or Che Ling, says that it depends. If your camera is working and your mic is working, Che Ling, if you want to come up and say a bit more about that, please feel free. Just click the raise hand button so we can bring you up on stage. Otherwise, if you want to write more in the chat, I can carry that over to people.
And Andy's got a great comment in there. More generally, through regular contact of any type or any kind, and I would agree that because of the ease of using things like Shindig and Google Hangouts and the more formal LMSs like Blackboard and Moodle, we're getting to the point where contact is not an issue anymore unless you're in one of those parts of the world still where internet access is a problem. But more and more, we're seeing immediate access with better communication. And if you have the good tools, you do feel like you're in a room with somebody. And as everybody else is saying here, that is a good step toward building up trust. Now, isn't that a lovely thing to think about, not only in educational technology, but in terms of trying to bridge some of these political barriers that are causing us so much grief at this point? If we can see each other and listen and make eye contact a little bit, we start to knock down the demonizing of each other and get to the point where we can do productive things.
I hope so. Oh, that's really positive. Thank you, Shiling, and please forgive me for massacring your name. Mark follows up by saying contacts across many platforms and events really count. And Vicky points out, knowing that you can engage real time and asynchronous, both. Step by step, we build these bonds. We make these connections across each other.
Oh, and that whole thing about across bounds and across time, a couple years ago, it was while I was still in ETMOOC, we came across a paper that was done, I think, in 2011 or 2012. And I believe the title of it, it was a long title, but the keywords were pointillist communication or pointillist time, where points in time no longer were there's this moment and then it's over, then there's this moment and it's over. The people doing this wonderful paper on pointillist time and asynchronous communication, making the point that if I post something on Twitter and it floats around out for 6 months and then somebody else sees it 6 months from now and responds, we've just had a 6 month long moment. And I'm seeing more and more of that. I think that's a really incredible part of our communication style and our learning styles that we're not addressing adequately yet, but it's just floating there waiting to be mined.
Well, I would love to see that I'd be able to see that article. A quick Googling is turning up lots of great examples from the history of pointillism, unfortunately, which is an art movement.
Yeah. Brian, afterwards, I don't want to break out of this and go Google it myself right now, but afterwards, if we don't get that link up, send me an email and I'll send you a link to the article.
Let's do that.
And right there is a complementary challenge of integrating formal and informal learning. That sort of takes us back to that pointillist moment a moment ago, where I was talking about how you might learn something one day, 6 months later you come back to it, the conversation extends over a long period of time. Our formal and informal learning are so blended together these days that we need to be more cognizant of that and see how we can work to our advantage to make that benefit our learners as well as ourselves as learning facilitators. So those are the solvable challenges that we expect to see in the short term, getting a lot of attention and guiding the discussions and actions, the discussions we have and the actions we take. Difficult challenges include what they call, or what we call, the achievement gap. That's a gap between people getting into school and actually graduating. Some of it's based on socioeconomic terms, some of it is gender politics. But as we look and see why some people succeed and others don't, we can use educational technology to try and move past that, which takes us back to something we were mentioning to each other a few minutes ago, the learning analytics. If with educational technology we can spot a learner in distress and we can step in a positive way to support them, that changes the outcome and it has the potential to decrease that achievement gap that we're seeing more and more that's so troublesome to so many of us. We don't want learners left behind. We want our learners with us. We don't want our workplace learners left behind. And I've seen that time and time again when I'm brought into a company to work short term as they make a transition from one form of technology, maybe something as simple as paper and laptops, to mobile devices. And the staff initially during the sessions is scared to death that I'm part of the crew that's there to get them out of their jobs because they're not capable of doing it. And I always address that. I learned this a long time ago. Straight up with those learners, the first thing I say is, your company's paying me a lot of money to be here to bring you up to speed. They wouldn't be doing that if they wanted to get rid of you. That level of transparency, that level of support, I think is important. Brian, you sounded like you wanted to say something there.
No, I think that was that level of transparency is crucial. And on the forum sessions over the past year, we've had many conversations about the, well, there's basically a politics of this. Can we access that information? Can students own that information? And what will institutions do with it? Will they keep it secure? Will they make it private? Will they share it with third-party companies? I mean, there's a whole politics that we need to deal with.
Oh, and I'd put that into the wicked challenge thing, because as soon as you define privacy, which many of us believe just doesn't exist anymore, or you define users' rights to their data, then you deal with big data issues and how fast things go out on the net. This is wicked. It really is wicked. After
But
the
we're not even there yet.
achievement,
We're the achievable ones right now.
well, we're diving into difficult. That's the achievement gap. That's one of the difficult ones. The other one is advancing digital equity, which again is something about, do people have the access they need to function at the level they need to function in their work life, in their personal lives, and in their social lives? Big, big challenge, and the report does a great job of talking about that. And finally, because we love wicked challenges and they keep us going, there is managing knowledge obsolescence. That whole theme that as soon as you learn something, something else comes along and knocks it out of the way. The learning facilitators, the teacher, trainer, learners out there struggle with it as much as the learners. I'm going through this right now. just got a new laptop and I'm finally getting into the Windows 10 environment. And it drives me berserk when I go to do something as simple as doing a print screen to do a PowerPoint deck, and the print screen button no longer works the way it used to. So I wish I had hair that I could pull out, but I, metaphorically I'm pulling out hair over the fact that knowledge obsolescence hits me as much as anybody else, and it's something that I'm aware of. Second of the wicked challenges, and this runs across all the Horizon reports, is very specifically here rethinking the roles of educators. But in the library edition, it's usually rethinking the roles of librarians. In the museum report, I believe that rethinking the role of museum workers and museum administrators is there. We're doing a lot of rethinking, and it ties into that knowledge obsolescence thing. We're in an environment where things change so quickly. Oh, wait, it changed. I can't finish that sentence. Things change so fast that we're overwhelmed. We're trying to drink from a fire hose, and we don't even know where the end of the fire hose is. So let's stop there, those significant challenges. You want to facilitate the discussion on that, Brian?
I do, but we already have a discussion question coming right in. This is from Brett, who asks, are there examples of the Horizon Report successfully persuading others? He says, I'd be interested to hear about specific examples in which the report has been used successfully to persuade policymakers, say the institution, the administration, a board, to change their approach to the issues the report addresses.
I know we're talking about that a lot. It's been an issue that colleagues and friends of mine have been asking me for 3 or 4 years. We've read the report. What do we do with it? How can we more effectively use it? Back last summer when we were at the annual New Media Consortium conference, 4 of us, 3 in the room and the 4th in the room from Australia via Google Hangout, addressed the topic of what can you do to take this report and make it actionable. We were talking about things that find some of the guidance that's in there and some of the links that take you to case studies, attention of your decision makers. To answer the question that was just asked directly, I don't know specifically of a case study that says, here's somebody who took a Horizon report and this is the outcome that came. But I have a lot of colleagues that tell me they routinely work it in to their discussions of trends, challenges, and technologies that their organizations need to be out there. So generically, I know it's having an impact. Specifically, I can't point and say UCLA did something or Golden Gate University here in San Francisco did something. I know we use this. I know we share it. I would, as much as anybody else, love to see a strong case study that showed start to finish what happened.
Well, we should find that, and I bet NMC can help with that.
I bet they could. Can you call Samantha right now?
I could, but she's actually on a plane, and I would love to bring her in for that. But we should be on
Virgin Airline. If she's on Virgin Airline, we can get her via the wireless. I've actually done that before. This whole thing I did, there is almost no place, unless you are totally without wireless access, there's almost no place where you can't reach somebody at the moment of need.
Well, that's half of Vermont right now. But
are you in the right half?
For right now, I am. Let me ask everybody: of all these challenges, and these challenges are formidable, which of these seem the most, significant to you? Digital literacy, the equity question, the knowledge obsolescence question, rethinking the roles of educators, dealing with the achievement gap. In fact,
and Mark Arfine has just put a beautiful comment into the chat window. To paraphrase Woody Allen, you wouldn't have to rethink your role if you thought about it the first time.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Or brings up Upton Sinclair, right? It's hard to convince a person to change their opinion when their salary depends on them understanding it. Well, let's Let's do this instead, because it's the time of the hour. Let's break into groups and discuss this. Let's think about these challenges, and let me ask, which of these is impacting you most closely? The way we do this on the forum is that the guests and I climb off the stage, join you, and we discuss this. So if you haven't done this before, it's really, really easy. You can see all the different people in your room right now. Most of them are presented by smiling faces or video feeds. Some of them are presented by silhouettes. Each one of those represents one person at a connection, sometimes more people. So find someone interesting and click on them. If they want to talk to you, your two icons will click together like Legos, and you can have a small private conversation. So try that. And the question is, which of these challenges seems the most important, the most impactful to where you are at your institution? Now, if you don't want to talk to somebody, that's fine. You can, if your mic isn't working, if you're in the middle of a crowd, if you're just very, very shy, that's all good. But just you can basically lock yourself so that people won't talk to you. You'll always get a chance to refuse. Well, let's take 5 minutes and mingle. Let's talk about these challenges and see which ones are facing you with the greatest ferocity. Zach, can you bring us down from the stage into the crowd? And let's mingle. Hey everybody, welcome back. I just had the wonderful conversation with Jialing in New York, and I can see conversations bubbling all over the place. That's one of the pleasures for me of these forum events, is to be able to have these kind of conversations that continue to rock and continue to roll. I really want to make sure this is not a broadcast or lecture. And we'll get Paul back up as soon as he's done. Paul, when you get a chance, Roxanne may have to sadly relinquish you and let you come back up on stage so we can continue our conversation. Oh, this is great. I get to see everyone swarming around now. Now we have to shift to talking about the third part of the Horizon Report. We've discussed the technology aspect. So what technologies Horizon is seeing that will come sooner and then later. So while I'm waiting for Paul, I can get things started by talking about a couple of these right now. So one thing to consider is to break the technologies up into about 5 years, and we have the short term, 1 year or less, then 2 to 3 years, then 4 to 5 years. And there's a lot of technologies to cover. So if you take a look at the report, you'll see there's a huge, huge list. But in the short term, the 1 to 2 years, there are two technologies in particular. One of them is adaptive learning, and one of them is mobile. So adaptive learning, these are technologies that adjust to account for learners' use, for what learners are doing, for how learners respond. So that's partly where personalized learning comes from. And mobile is something that's been, well, frankly, it's been on the Horizon Report for almost a decade. And the reason for persisting is because, on the one hand, mobile is obviously huge, obviously powerful, obviously shaking up the entire world with lots of educational applications. But in education, we're still grappling with it. We're still just on the edge of adopting it. The majority of campuses in the United States that I talk to, for example, do not have a bring your own device policy. So it is still tricky to try and engage mobile. Paul, what do you think? Is mobile a good one to have in the short term?
Absolutely. we don't want the report to just become a predictable thing where the same things are in that 1 year horizon perpetually. And yet, I think you've done a great job of pointing out that mobile is still there because it's evolving so much. And the mobile that we're talking about now is not the mobile of 10 years ago. I think
True.
there are probably a good number of our colleagues who still think of mobile learning as sit down, design something, put it up, have lots of quizzes in there, and at the end of it, give a certificate. And nothing could be further from the truth right now in terms of where mobile is. Mobile is everything from that kind of out of the can, terrible learning that none of us really appreciated to us looking at each other and say, hey, I need to learn this right now. Going online, getting something on YouTube while we're holding our smartphone or our tablet or anything else we're using and learning in that moment what we need to learn. It's a dynamic, ever-changing environment. And again, it's one of the more exciting things that I think we are following and paying attention to and learning from.
Well, that's great. Again, that's the short term. We're taking a look at the 1 year or less. So if we push,
Isn't it funny, Brian? As you said, it's been there a decade. So this short term has been a pointillist 1 year, 10 year conversation, and there's no
mm,
end in sight to
mm,
it.
no, that's true. That's true. Well, take us to the 2 to 3 year period. What are the technologies that Horizon sees coming up at that
Sure.
horizon?
Horizon C or NMC through Horizon sees the Internet of Things and next generation learning management systems as being right there on the cusp over the next 2 to 3 years. The Internet of Things we've been talking about for a long time, and it's as simple as the connections that allow us to see where our equipment is, if you're in a library, knowing where a specific book is, to magnificent things about if you're doing field work, being able to track that stuff in educational terms. Again, I think
Mm,
we're just starting to
mm.
scratch the surface. Every couple of years, I'll go and pick up whatever book has just come out on the Internet of Things, see where we're at. And it's evolving almost as quickly as mobile learning is, but it hasn't reached the widespread use that mobile learning has. The second of the two there, the next generation LMSs, that's a fascinating one because I believe most of us in training, teaching, and learning think of an LMS. I can't even say it. LMS as something where you chunk your materials in, you make it available to the learners, and then if you're really sophisticated about it, you can look at your grading systems. Where in fact, LMSs can be a much more LMS as a term can actually be a much broader term. I remember about, oh, 7, 8 years ago, where my LMS at a public library was Excel. That's how I managed things. And yet it
Wow.
worked. And
Wow.
it's a good model for thinking that you don't have to have a
Wow.
Blackboard or a Moodle or something like that if that's not what your learning environment requires. So we're seeing an evolution in thinking about what a learning management system is and does, and how effectively we can use it to the benefit of the learners and the societies that they serve. The wicked
Hang on
challenges.
1 second, just before you go there, I just want to grab Roxanne Riskin points out that UCF has a long-term research study on mobile, um, and she threw the URL in there, and I'll put that up on Twitter to go back to the mobile
Wonderful.
technology part. Thank you, Roxanne.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to see if I can
Um,
do a little cut and paste here myself so I don't lose this. Question for you, Brian. What the chat that's showing up here in Shindig, since this is my first time using Shindig as a platform, are we going to have access to the chat afterwards, or what happens to the links that we have there?
Well, the chat is interesting. The chat in Shindig is, first of all, there's not one chat. There are several. One is broken up into rooms. So as people pile into Shindig, they get segmented in different rooms, which are scaled from between 12 and 20. So right now there's 20 apiece. So each room has their own separate chat. So you have to actually switch rooms to see someone else's chat. Um, and no, we don't automatically archive them, although I can try to copy and unload these off into a text window right now. But I've been harvesting the links and putting them into Twitter, and I will storify this and put the storify up on Twitter right afterwards. So
Thank you.
we've got that as well.
So the final thing that we look at here in the 4 to 5 year horizon for technology is artificial intelligence and natural user interfaces. Artificial intelligence we've been talking about so long, I don't think that needs a lot of explanation from me, except that if we had real intelligence, maybe we wouldn't need artificial intelligence. Oh, I'm being smart. Yeah. And natural user interfaces, that's a broad topic that takes in some of my favorite technological innovations that are happening right now. This whole idea that getting a sense of touch from some of the educational technology we have allows people to do things like what I was watching a local newscast broadcast last night, a university where they were doing, actually, it wasn't a university now that I think about it. Paramedics in Sacramento, California had a fake ambulance in a training situation where the paramedics could actually take a mannequin that had haptic abilities and had all kinds of other things there. The dummy would react based on what they did, and it was programmed to respond to 100 different medical emergencies. And oh my God, that would be just a nightmare for a healthcare agency to try to take care of that mannequin. But
Yeah.
joking aside, it was a lovely thing with this natural user interface to see the paramedics picking up a mannequin that could make sounds like a real person would make, having the distress signs that somebody would have under certain situations, picking the thing up and getting it into the fake paramedic vehicle there so that they were working in the kind of constrained places that they would actually work in. This is not unusual. In fact, we're seeing this in mainstream evening news, tells us that although we're seeing this in higher education on a 4 to 5 year adoption horizon, I see in professional adult training settings this happening now. As
Well,
so
it's a
often
question.
happens, the future is now. We just haven't identified it, recognized that it's already here.
True, or hasn't gotten very far. I mean,
Yes.
what we see in medical training or in allied health might not branch out into, say, sociology or French. Um, and it's also geographically uneven. I saw a fantastic simulation clinic in Helsinki last year, which had home situations. So they simulated a home environment for home healthcare. And in there, they had at least one dummy with sounds with haptic feedback, which could be controlled from an operator in the next room. So you would have a student go to the university, go into the simulated home, interact with a simulated patient, and then the other students could actually manipulate the dummy from a remote control to give them, sounds, feedback, even fluids, and all kinds of responses. And it's a fantastic training tool. Let me just remind everybody that we have a few minutes left for your questions and comments. We've covered 18 points so far. By we, I mean Paul, who's been doing the lion's share of the work. So we've been discussing these trends that help accelerate the adoption of technology. We've been discussing challenges, which are challenges for everything in education. And we've hit on the 6 major technologies that are likely to come. And all these are in a 5-year horizon. I mean, the Future Trends Forum is based on discussions about the future of education and technology. And this is the primary stuff. So if what do you see of all these that is really beginning to work with you? Are you seeing the Internet of Things begin to play out? Are you seeing the knowledge obsolescence as a threat that confronts you? Please feel free to click the raise hand to come up on stage, or the question to give us a text chat. And if you'd like to say something more on Twitter, Twitter right now is pretty hot, but it's mostly people sharing the different elements that we've been talking about so far. Roxanne, you should be proud that the number one UCF fan, according to me, it says, has retweeted my tweet about that UCF study. While we wait for people to think about this, let me mention that during the Mingle session, Chelang and I talked about the question of building online trust. And it was very interesting. She was discussing the ways in which we could see art education, different technologies, building connections between people. It's often a question of which platforms we choose and how we present ourselves in them and what we want to use. We're not all on Twitter. We're not all on Facebook. We're not all on Google Plus. It's a pretty complex topic.
It's a complex environment that we're facing, and until we acknowledge that it's a complex, ever-changing, kind of wicked challenge learning environment, we're not going to come anywhere near resolving some of the challenges we face because we're sort of putting band-aids on something that's so big that the band-aid doesn't even cover the wound.
Ouch. Ouch.
Yeah. Didn't mean to be that graphic, but it strikes me that that's really where we're at.
I was thinking of graphic as it being a little distressing in general.
Pull the band-aid right off, right? Too fast.
That's right. That's right. Well, here comes the pus. No, I think there's when we look at this, one important point too, if you're curious at a meta level, is that the report for the first time looks back at previous Horizon reports to see what trends they predicted and which ones they got right, which ones they got wrong, or where they came from. Let me ask you, Paul. I mean, if you can get that meta level, what are some of the major takeaways you've gotten from being in this process for 6+ years, trying to think about the next 5 years? What do you take away from that?
The takeaway for me as somebody who's been on the expert panels is that the very process of gathering information and sharing information is is phenomenal and something that should be replicated at every possible stage and every possible level of our learning environments. That whole Delphi process you talked about, where people all over the world for a couple months get together, really have some good, intense exchanges synchronously as well as asynchronously about what we're seeing. And from that comes a report that the staff at NMC puts together, which then is downloaded hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times every year all over the world. That is a phenomenal expression of what our tools allow us to do, as opposed to perhaps even 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
where you might get something that was printed and then sent to your local libraries, and maybe it ended up on a few desks and people talked about it. But here, we're having synchronous and asynchronous conversations 24/7 on issues that affect what we do and how we build the very culture that we're part of. That to me is
Mm,
stunning.
that's fantastic. Oh, thank you, Paul. That's a very optimistic draw. Um, we
Yeah, bring Ruben in, and we can do one Ruben Plantadura sessions about how we're all going to hell in a handbasket,
Ruben and I
and have him
we tag
lead
team
us
on
down
that
the
one.
right road.
Um, I think we have a raised hand from Mark Ulett. So, Mark, if you're ready, if you can climb on up. Um, well, while we Mark should be on the West Coast, actually, with you, Paul. So if we
I
can
think
get
I can
Mark,
see him over there in Oakland.
yeah, no, he's actually a bit further south. He's in Stanton. Um,
Ah,
well, if we can't get Mark, I'm going to actually have to, with regret, bid you farewell. We are at the end of a rapid hour. But wait, here's Mark. If he can come in, let's see.
okay, Brian, clap your hands together 3 times and say, "I do believe in Mark. I do believe in Mark. I do believe in
We all believe in fairies, right? We have to get that. Oh, I'm not seeing him. I'm not seeing him. But
We
we'll have
didn't
to try.
believe enough.
Not enough, but we have enough belief in. Um, I think in this process. The one thing we are out of is time. Thank you so much, Paul. You are a
Pleasure. Thank you.
gifted virtual presenter, and it's wonderful to share the stage with you. Thank you so much for bringing all this information and for being so generous with your time. And we really appreciate your optimism and sense of humor as well.
Thanks.
We'll be here for another couple of minutes if you guys want to talk, but let me quickly show you some foretaste of what's happening next week. Um, first of all, keep in mind that over the next week, we are finishing our reading of Sarah Goldrick-Rab's Paying the Price, which is a very, very powerful book about higher education finance in the United States. Next week is actually the last chapter, along with the technical appendices. So you can join up and find that. Our next presenter next week is Martin Carnoy, also from the West Coast, a professor of education economics at Stanford University, who has a lot to say about where education is going, again, in terms of economics, which is something we've been discussing off and on for the past year. So please sign up for that. It's going to be a very, very exciting session. In the meantime, if you'd like to find out more about the forum or about the report, go to fete.us, go to shindig.com to find out more about Shindig, and we'll see you on Twitter in the meantime, and hopefully next week we'll see you then. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.